Hello, Nisha, and welcome to the program.
Hi, Monique. Nice to be here.
Nisha, I read that you didn't set out to make this film. You were making a different film. What was that other film, and how did it lead to this film?
First of all, the film took 8.5 years to make. And when I started the film all of those years ago, the film that I was actually making was a film on masculinity, looking at masculinity in India. And for many years, I've been looking at gender rights issues, specifically with a focus on India. And so I wanted to make a film on masculinity because I felt, the missing piece in terms of understanding gender justice is not so much women, it's actually men and how we raise men and the definitions of masculinity that we continue to kind of like prescribe. So that was the intention. And as I was making the film, I was actually focusing on the work of an organization, of an NGO that was running a gender sensitization program in the state of Jharkhand, where the film takes place. And they were working with men and boys to teach them a different way of being male. And Ranjit, who is the father in the film, he was enrolled in this program. So that was literally how I came across this story, because I was following the work of an organization. And that organization, of course, is the organization in the film that helps him with the case.
So, when you say 8.5 years, I could only imagine the amount of footage that you filmed during that time. Given that you went into this project with a particular focus, how did you know that you had another project on your hands?
So yes, we amassed, I don't know how many hundreds of hours of material, a lot of material, because in the field, I was filming not just this story, I wasn't tracking just this story, but I was tracking the work of Mahinderji, one of the activists that features in the film. And I was also following the story of two young boys who were taking part in these groups that they were conducting, that the NGO was conducting. And so, so the idea was that I would kind of weave these three stories together and have a portrait of masculinity in India. That was the idea. And I filmed for 3.5 years, right? So because the project that they were running, the program, that the gender sensitization program, was for 3.5 years. So I filmed that entire process. And when we came back into the edit, just the amount of material we had, the fact that we had material that was in 5 different dialects, the fact that, we have to subtitle and process all that footage just takes a huge amounts of time. And it took, I would say, about 2.5 years before we finally realized that what we had in the material was not one film, but really it was 2 separate films. And that the story of Ranjit and his family and Kiran and that struggle for justice really just needed its own treatment, and it needed a feature-length documentary. There were a couple of editors, a couple of friends of ours that we showed the material to, and they convinced us that we had 2 hours in our 2 films in our material, rather.
Ranjit, as you mentioned, is the father in the film and a main character. And essentially, he supports his daughter's decision to pursue legal action against the young men that sexually assault her. What do you think it is about Ranjit that makes him so unique? What do you think makes him special?
He's definitely an exceptional human being. And I think he's exceptional in the Indian context, but I think he's also exceptional universally. I think he's just an exceptional man and sort of a champion, a male champion that we can sort of hold up as a role model that men can aspire to, boys can aspire to. And I think that's because he just himself, there's two reasons in terms of why he is the way he is. I think one, when you think about social change, period, right? When you think about how things happen and how we make social movements, there's always one person who stands up. There's always somebody who fights, There's always somebody who just is motivated very powerfully to do the right thing. It always happens, right? You're confronted with a moral choice, and there are people in history that take one road, and that's how change happens. And then there are others who don't. Ranjit is the person who took that road. I think that's part of it. I think it's in his DNA. I think the other thing, he was probably shaped very much by the fact that he was raised by a single mom. So he grew up with. He didn't have a father. He had a father, but his father had abandoned the family. And I think seeing his mother struggle and supporting her and understanding her strength definitely made him a feminist, helped to shape him for sure. It wasn't the only thing, but it definitely, I would say, helped to shape him.
You also wrote that this film posed a huge ethical dilemma for you at one point in time. Can you talk about what that dilemma was?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, in some ways it continues to, right? Just the very act, like I think this film made me sort of start to question really the ethics of documentary filmmaking, period, right? Like it really forced me to look at the craft of documentary filmmaking, ideas around objectivity, the impact that we have on situations. So there were lots of things with this particular film that really forced me to ask some serious questions and to kind of really go internal, and look inside. And I think that internal process definitely was part of what really guided, I would say, how we ended up making the film and the things that we chose to keep in the film. It's very clear. I mean, all documentary filmmakers have an impact on reality. It's just part of the nature of the form. It's inherent in the form. There's no such thing as kind of objectivity. In this particular case, there was also no getting away from the fact that we were having an impact on the family, on the community. It was just there. And we did not want to shy away from that, right? We put it out there because it was important to put it out there. And I think for me, for the most critical scene where I really had to think about this was the scene where we're in the community and the villagers come into the home and start to threaten us. Because of course you're thinking, you're worried for your safety, you're worried for the family. But for me, what I realized in that moment, it wasn't so much that I felt afraid, right? There was danger, of course, and I was afraid for everyone's safety. But I think more than that, what I felt was a recognition of how I had affected an ecosystem and a very complicated culture. And, obviously a culture that needed to be shaken up. I mean, things have to change and you cannot force a child to marry her rapist. But I also recognized the impact that we were having, right? And that was also problematic, right? So it kind of makes you recalibrate certain things, and it forces you to ask much deeper philosophical questions than you would normally.
I did read that you decided to not hide the young lady's identity. And in contrast, I noticed in the film, the faces of the young men's were blurred.
We blurred out the faces of the perpetrators because we had to do it legally. That wasn't a decision that I made, and I would not have done it actually. And we had to do it. So that's why we've done it. With her, it was the opposite. With her, because it took so long for us to make the film. By the time we finished the film, she was 18. And so she saw the film. We let her watch the film, and we had when we had been speaking to her about, whether she wanted to be shown or not shown, how she felt about it. So she asked to see the film. And after she saw the film is when she decided that she wanted to come forward and that she didn't actually want to be hidden. And the way she puts it, it's so beautiful, because we had a conversation afterwards, right after she'd seen the film. I asked her why she decided to come forward, and she said it was because she herself couldn't believe her courage at that age, and she felt that child and that 13-year-old needed to be celebrated. So it's very, very powerful experience for her. And she and her father have come to screenings, in the UK. We're trying to get them to come to do impact screenings in the US, but they've come for screenings in the UK, and it was really, really beautiful, powerful experience for everyone, including them, of course. So
There's a scene in the film where the main character is tying ribbons into her sister's hair, and she herself is wearing ribbons. And in that moment, it really strikes you that this is a young girl, and it's a young schoolgirl that's dealing with adult emotions and adult decisions.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. That scene is like, I remember the first time Mike Munn, one of our editors, showed us that scene. There were two editors on this film, Mike Munn and Dave Casala. And I just remember watching that for the first time, and just, it's so powerful. It's so, so powerful. And I think, and I just, if I could, just sort of talk about the level of talent of people that were on this film, it's kind of extraordinary, like Mike and Dave, Jonathan Goldsmith, our composer, Lou Solovkowski, who did our sound and design, and my husband Mernal, and who's Desai, who's a cinematographer, and Anita Kushwaha, who's sound recordist, right? Like, there's just incredible minds that were all working to create something here that was powerful and deserving of the family,
You talk about that scene with the villagers where things come to a head, and we can see that the social pressures are not just on the family, but are extending past that. There's a moment where the third wall is broken and we get a chance to hear your voice. And actually, in the film, there are other instances where we also hear your voice. During the editing process, you could have made the decision to remove those scenes. Why did you decide to leave those scenes where your voice can be heard in the film?
That's a good question. And sometimes there are questions that have no answers. When you're making a film, I think often also when you're creating something, you're not even sure what's guiding you. Sometimes it's a practical thing, like you can't actually cut around your voice, and you just need to, it has to be there. And other times it's an instinct thing, and it's a feel thing, and you just feel like it's important that your voice is asking the question, and it can be heard, because it gives something to the audience. And sometimes I feel like having the voice there, it makes something less sensationalist, and it becomes about a dynamic and a dialogue, as opposed to, like, not exposition, that's not the right word, but just for me, it just humanizes the whole process, and the people that you're speaking to, right? So it's just a really an instinct thing. It's really hard to describe why you make certain choices.
Nisha, you worked on this film for 8.5 years, and I'd like to ask you, what do you think needs to happen for there to be a fundamental shift regarding women's safety in India? Maybe I should ask rather, during that time, has there been a fundamental shift in women's safety, and in particular in villages in India?
Um, it's hard for me to talk about these. They're very specific, and I think you need people who are real experts and activists on the ground that have been monitoring this stuff for years and understand. I'll say a couple of things. One is, if you just philosophically, change is inevitable. That's just the human condition. It is the law of nature, right? That change will happen. So everything is constantly changing. Things are constantly evolving. So of course there are changes happening in villages across the country, and Ranjit and Kiran are a perfect example of that, right? And because of the step that they took, it has meant changes, right? I feel that there have been several extraordinary movements that have taken place historically in India, and they tend to come after horrific incidences of violence against women. When we look at women rights in India specifically, right? So there have been in the past, there have been, in the 70s and the 90s, horrific cases that changed law or changed public opinion and consciousness. And the last one that we remember, which really made universal headlines and global headlines, of course, was the 2012 Delhi gang rape, when the young student was raped and died from her injuries on a bus in Delhi. So that precipitated, what that led to was a strengthening of laws. It led to something called the Verma Commission, and which essentially was a strengthening of rape laws in India. Powerful, including the POCSO Act, which was the act that is mentioned in the film that governs sexual offenses that concern children. So undoubtedly, there are changes that are happening culturally, legally, systemically. It's the process is underway. The problem is that the culture is not able to keep up with the law. The law is progressive. The Constitution of India is extremely progressive. The issue is the culture. And for me, what I realized after having worked on this issue in India for so many years is that if you don't deal with masculinity, if you don't start working with men and boys, it does not matter how much women fight. It doesn't matter. It will be like running a three-legged race, right? You have to, it's the missing piece. The missing piece is masculinity.
This film looks at the issue of women's safety and misogyny within a very particular context. However, I was really struck by some of the language in the film because it was very familiar. I want to ask you, in showing this film in Europe and in Canada, and it's gone all over the world in festivals, have many folks talked about what the film means within a North American or European context?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that, for me, that is the strength of the film. It's because even though the story is so specific and it's rooted in a particular culture, in a particular place in time, the fundamental truth is that as women, as girls, all of us, no matter where we are in the world, understand that our bodies aren't safe. We know it, and we grow up understanding that no matter where we are. So I think that's the reason that so many people are so emotionally affected by the film, no matter where they are. It's the sexual violence that women face all around the world. It's the comments that we're used to hearing, no matter where we are in the world. What was she wearing? Was it her fault? Did you have a drink? Why did you go home with him? What were you doing out so late? It's so common. We've all grown up hearing that stuff, right? So people are people are resonating. The film is resonating for people rather because of the universality of it, And I think also then it's also the story of, it's like this David and Goliath story, of a powerless person against a system. And it's about a father's love, it's about the bonds of family and what you will do for your child, right? Which is something that every parent can relate to.
Nisha, do you ever leave a project like this behind? Does it ever end?
Does it ever end? Yeah, they do. I was kind of so preoccupied, like with The World Before Her, there was so much that took 4 years. And then there was impact work that I did. So, I was engaged in that film for 6 years, right? Because we did a big impact campaign in India, and that took a year. And then I traveled with that film for a year to festivals. With this one, it's already been close to 10 years, right? Like it's been close to 10 years that I've been on this journey with this film, and it will continue for at least another year because of the impact campaign that we're doing with, we have an organization that we're working with called Equality Now, and they're come on as our impact campaign partner. So we're doing incredible things with them around the film. So it will leave me, but I think this one has been extremely special, and it has everything to do with the family and how much that family just, what a gift, and that trust, and how much love and affection there is for them, and the fact that they're a part of my life, and they will be forever, right? We know that. And I have to say that I think I might be strange in one way, in that in every single one of my films, I am in touch with some of the people in my films, and some of them are very close friends, and some of them are actually funding my work. So they become family. They never leave you in that sense. Yeah.
Nisha, thank you so much for joining me here on Alika this morning.
Thank you so much, Monique, for having me. It was such a pleasure. You're such a great interviewer. Thank you.
That was documentary filmmaker Nisha Pahuja. Her documentary To Kill a Tiger is premiering on Tuesday, December 5th on TVO and streaming free of charge across Canada on tvo.org, YouTube, and on the NFB's website, which can be found at nfb.ca.